it's always weird when we take the 5 seconds of silence. No matter how, especially for people who talk a lot, no matter how much you talk, 5 seconds of silence when
Good.
somebody tells you to be silent is forever.
It seems like an eternity.
It is. It does.
Stretches.
It does. I'm sure being in Congress, you probably can appreciate some silence here or there.
Yeah, we need more of that out there. More thoughtful silence.
Yes. Well, we are here. U.S. Representative Dusty Johnson, thank you so much for coming to spend some time with us. You're a great example of leadership, and I'm excited to discuss why. You and I have had some conversations previously, and I've always appreciated your engagement. And I want people to get a chance to get to know you, and so they could be closer to their representatives. And I think that's always a good thing. So I want to start off just by having you just tell us a little bit about you and how did you get here in 2022 being the human that you are right now?
Grew up poor family. I mean, sometimes I say working class, but that's really just a euphemism for poor, at least the way I use it.
Right.
And there were 7 of us, and we were on plenty of government programs from time to time, Bonnie. And even at a young age, I remember being appreciative that those sort of things existed, but also being fascinated about where's the Goldilocks moment, right? Where's the Goldilocks spot? If you do too much for people they can do for themselves, you breed dependence.
Yep.
And so how do you really help, that poor kid in Fort Pierre get what he needs, to have food in the belly and have, a warm house, but also have him kind of have those moments of discomfort and growth and hunger so that somebody like me can, have the hunger that it takes to move forward.
Yeah. Well, for me, as a person who's in a similar situation, leadership is for us what the answer is and why we invest so much in our Leaders of Tomorrow program. Because no matter how much you give a person, if they never get to the point where they can lead themselves, right, it's going to be difficult to break that cycle. So as we talk about leadership, what does that mean to you when you think about leadership, and how has that played a part in you overcoming those circumstances? Because you could have gone the other way, and you found that right mix. What got you through it to a point where you are a contributor to society?
If I think about it for very long, I could just start crying. But when I think about how many people invested in me, and again, at the time some of these people were investing in me, it had to be selfless, because there is no way that they ever could have thought that they would have gotten something out of taking this kid under their wing. And it's not one person, it's not 2 people, it's not 3 people. And to me, that's a good reminder that, I think I was lucky poor.
Yeah.
Right? I had a mom and a dad in the picture, and I had a community that was going out of its way to try to make sure I didn't fall off the path.
Yeah.
Not everybody who grows up poor grows up lucky poor.
Yeah.
And that's why when I see anybody investing time in kids, what greater gift can you give?
I think everybody that comes from those type of backgrounds can attach it to that, and even people who come from more favorable backgrounds as well. And one of the things I'm always struck by, one of the things I'm always challenged by, frustrated by, is why do we leave it to luck, right? And it seems like for most people who get through it, there's some clear themes, right? There are adults in your life who were altruistic and gave you care and consideration that you didn't necessarily ask for or deserve. There are people who taught you things that gave you skills that allowed you to overcome obstacles. They gave you perspective and worldview. And having a broader worldview. You know what I mean? There's some really consistent elements to it. It just seems so hard to nail down. And I don't care what capacity you look at it, whether it be education, whether it be our justice system, whether it be just our social networks. What are some things, especially having the experience of talking to so many citizens on such a regular basis, what do you think are some of those themes? Or what do you think some things that might be important for us to make this more consistent so it doesn't have to come down to luck?
Yeah, so I think two points, and they seem a little contrary, because in one I'm going to talk about the role of government, and the other I'm going to say that that's not enough, right?
Right.
And I think we're moving in the right direction. So you look at the criminal justice system, I think we have figured out that just locking people up and throwing away the key doesn't actually keep our communities safe.
Right.
It doesn't. It doesn't really work. And so I think we've understood that this is about an incredible investment of people. We now have diversion courts, we have drug courts, we have veterans courts, we have a deeper understanding of the fact that you may have to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 professionals engaged in helping somebody get clean. And actually, if you get the person clean, they're not a threat to themselves or their family or society. But getting them clean is like,
it's a doozy.
It's a doozy. And so you can either tell them, hey, you bum, get clean, or you can actually lift them up and help them, wrap your arms around them. And that there is a role for government in doing that stuff.
Right.
We cannot leave that to luck. On the other hand, we also can't just leave it to government. I get really frustrated when I will talk about somebody, I'll proposition somebody, I'll solicit them about helping somebody out. And every once in a great while, you'll get somebody to be like, well, that's what I pay taxes for. Bull crap. Yeah, of course we're going to pay taxes, but that does not discharge you of your obligation to be a decent human being.
Yes.
We really do have to find people who need help, and we've got to invest in them. And sometimes that's going to be through a nonprofit. Sometimes that's just going to be about being a decent human being one-on-one.
Yes.
Now, you're right. That injects a certain amount of luck about it because it requires that you connect with that person on the street or through a cousin or at a church. But I just don't think we can say that that's just government's job. One quick example I'll give. I was 6 or 7. Dad was in alcohol treatment the month of December, inpatient. His mom and 5 kids. And there was not going to be much Christmas. I'm the oldest of 5, and I knew at some level there wasn't going to be much of a Christmas, and I'd kind of come to grips with it.
Yeah.
Even at 6 or 7, New Year, Christmas Eve, 3 cars pull up, dudes I had never seen before, old guys. They filled our house with more presents than we had ever had. No government program paid for that. Nobody told those guys to do that. And let's be honest, most poor kids in America don't get that. So there is an aspect of luck. But I would tell you that there were times going to the grocery store with food stamps where I felt ashamed, and I felt like that made me feel small. I felt 10 feet tall that night, where those guys, through only their own love, engaged with a family that they didn't even really know.
And I want to paint a picture for people, because I think people in this modern days, they see an EBT card and they see this thing where if you don't really know what you're looking at, that person gets to have a normalized interaction that they would have to any other customer. You swipe the thing, you punch in the number, you get your food, you go home, right?
Didn't used to be like that.
It did not used to be like that. For people who are not familiar, you used to get this booklet of neon colored,
bright red, bright blue, bright green.
It was developed for the purposes of shame. Look at my circumstance. And at that time, at least in where I was at, a lot of parents would send their kids to the bodega, corner store, whatever it was, to go get the stuff. And you're sitting there and you would sheepishly put out this neon colored paper that everybody, and the interesting thing about it is that most of the people that were making fun of me were poor as well. But the interesting thing is it still brought about shame. And like you said, feeling small. And what we know is, and when we do trainings with leadership groups, we always ask them, who works better when they feel bad? And no one ever raises their hand. People don't work better when they feel bad. And I mean, people went out of the way to make you feel bad as if that was a greater motivator than inspiration, motivation, encouragement, love, compassion, all of those different type of things. And so growing up in an environment where you had some people who experienced that, where by the time the person understood the concept of money and finance and all of those other type of things, they already had a diminished self-esteem and a limited worldview and a lower opinion of themselves. The very things you need to be successful in that world. And it's not just about poverty. As we both know, there are some people, one of the things I appreciate about this community is that when I got here, I was able to go to friends' houses and they had all these big houses. And I'd be like, man, you guys got everything. Your life must be great. And then what I realized that is that this kid's dad was working all the time, was never at home, never really talked to him. His dad wasn't at home like my dad wasn't at home. My dad was gone for different reasons, but both of our fathers weren't there. And that experience is the same. Pain is relative. And I think sometimes because we don't have an empathy for that either way, we don't spend a whole lot of time looking at things from other people's perspectives. Being in a situation where we always talk about the polarization of politics and things of that nature, but it's been polarized for a long time. Um,
But I think it's getting worse.
yes. So the idea of people just having so little compassion or empathy or understanding or willingness to look at things from their perspective, how does that challenge you? I mean, especially when you go back day after day after day into a knife fight. It's like the West Side Story, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you get up for that, and how do you get through that?
Yeah, when you're the jet all the way. I mean,
Right.
the West Side Story analogy is really not terrible because sometimes you think about, well, aren't these gang or tribal affiliations kind of arbitrary, right?
Yeah.
Because you were born on this block or because you were friends with this guy, like now the other side's the arch enemy. Like it can be a
Yeah.
little arbitrary. And I don't want to say that parties are arbitrary because there's a worldview that underpins that.
For sure.
But we take it way too far in this lack of empathy. And I don't really know what the root cause was. As you mentioned, it's been there for a long time. I mean, it wanes, it comes and goes. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s, I feel like you heard a lot more that, oh, well, the other side's got some good ideas too.
Mhm.
Or, and in fact, the data bears that out. Throughout the 70s and the 80s, United States senators, a majority of United States senators represented states that had voted for the other party's presidential candidate.
Mhm.
That's how much people were willing to ticket split. And,
Mhm.
I'll vote a D here, I'll vote an R there. And of course, now I think there are only 5 United States senators for whom that can be said. Not 50 or 55, 5.
Mhm.
And it's just become so tribal. And you're right, Bonnie. It makes it a more difficult environment to wade into because all of the incentives in the system reward fighting rather than
Mhm.
working.
Well, even that, like, to your point, when you get into mid late 80s, there was some real intelligent, strategic people who put in certain practice into play to own the soundbite, to own certain things that we see rearing its head now, and quite honestly gets used against us from other countries and other things. These type of things to either keep people from voting or challenge people in voting or get people fighting about something that isn't the real subject matter. A lot of this stuff was done with a fair amount of intention, and it feels like it's going to take so much more to get it back. And there's someone who will argue you can't put that genie back in the bottle. I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. But do I have a right to be that optimistic?
I don't think things are ever going to get back to, and there's nostalgia at play here, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people talk about the 1950s as a great period of economic growth in this country in a time of relative political peace. It was, but only if you were one color,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
and so maybe things weren't quite as good in 1954 as we think it was.
Yeah.
And that being said, I think things are going to get better than they are now because I don't know that they can get a lot worse.
Right, right.
But it's never going to get back to the way it was probably in 1992 or something.
For sure.
And there are some of my colleagues, they look at that and they say, damn it, if the fever's not going to break, then I'm out of here. And to me, I view it the reverse, which is, okay, well, if the fever's not going to break, it's all the more important that we have people who are willing to take their spot online who,
Mhm.
even during the delirium of a fever, can make sure that we answer the bell.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the future because, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but I think it's always interesting when people ask like the time machine question, like if you can go anywhere in time, blah blah. I think that's always a strange question to ask to people of color, particularly Black people, because we don't want to go back. Just no time I want to go back to, right? So when we talk about the future, though, what do you think the future holds? If you could paint a vision of what you really believe is realistic, particularly one for South Dakota and one for the country at large, because I believe that we could change a lot of things through hyper focus, not so focused that we don't understand the big picture and we can't see the forest amongst the trees. But we talk a lot about the idea of what a person can influence, control, or what they're concerned about. There's a lot that I'm concerned about in politics. There's a lot that I'm concerned about in the world or whatever. I can't do anything about it. It doesn't really serve me well to get, too wrapped up into that. There's some things that I can control, mainly myself. I try to be thoughtful about the type of energy I put in the world and what I physically do. But one of the greatest avenues is influence. And we believe that, leadership is influence. And as we go into the future, how can a person in South Dakota influence their local government, influence their processes, influence the way they're schools work and influence folks like you that are, because as you again alluded to earlier, the idea of being representative assumes that both parties are engaging. It seems more like people are sending you to go work for them. So, what does that look like? How can people get back in the game, put their hands back on the wheel, and get back to the we the people form of government, which this whole thing was supposed to be based off of?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of things going well. There are
Mhm.
not a lot of things going well with the federal government. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean we're messing a lot of things up, and the R's and the D's they both own plenty of that, right?
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that things aren't going well from a societal perspective. There are so many incredible things going on at the local level. There's so many incredible things going on with technology
Mhm.
and development. I mean, you look at what we were able to do with this vaccine. That had
Yeah.
never before been done. We have a lot of very, very smart people, and there are faith communities in hundreds of towns that are doing things and bringing people together that we
Mhm.
could not have imagined them doing a few decades ago. So, and listen, people who engage in this podcast are going to be all over the political spectrum. Part of what would cause me, just me, to be less inclined toward more government intervention is I think the federal government gets a lot of things wrong, right?
Mhm.
And I think sort of the broader universe is more likely to get it right.
Yeah.
So let's look pre-COVID. For something like 30 or 40 years, we had violent crime rates going way down in American
Mhm.
cities. We were kind of in the greatest era of American cities.
Mhm.
Downtowns had come back. We'd figured out how to grow without forcing people out of an area quite so much, right?
Mhm.
We'd figured out, I mean, there were just a lot of things going well. And so I believe in local governments. I believe in communities. I believe in researchers. The federal government's probably going to continue to get things wrong more often than right.
Yeah.
So what can people do? Don't get angry. I mean, you can be frustrated. You can be
Mhm.
irritated because there's a lot of change that's got to get done.
Mhm.
But anger is an impediment to progress.
Yeah.
You can have some righteous indignation,
Yeah.
but just screaming doesn't make anything better. It doesn't help a relationship. It doesn't help run a nonprofit. It does not help to bring someone to your side.
For sure.
And so if I had, one message to anybody who wanted to do a better job getting engaged, number one, believe in yourself. Your views have merit too.
Mhm.
Don't quiet yourself because you're not an expert. Get engaged and then just go tell your story. These stories are powerful.
Yeah. So when we think about like the idea that I'm always engaged by, which is civitas, right? The responsibility of being a citizen, and even the responsibility of education. It's weird right now because there's so many. Without unpacking all of these, there's so many kind of stories out there. Whether it be people looking at social media as their primary source for information, people looking at comedians, your Joe Rogan type situations that are happening right now, looking for comedians. And then what we do in the school, your CRT conversations and all of those type of things. Education is a cure to a lot of these things, and a lot of people don't even understand how this country works. I mean, that schoolhouse rock thing isn't happening anymore, like how a bill, turns into a law type of thing. And a lot of people don't know that, and there doesn't seem to be any trusted sources, and that part doesn't seem to be getting any better. And so when we know the cure for so many of these ills is education, but you can't trust where the education is coming from, or at the very least, it is contested. H- What do you think? What's Is there something happening on a national level? And am I right to be as concerned about that as I feel like I am?
Yeah, I think you're right to be concerned. I wish people would join more things. We are not as much of a society of joiners as we used to be. We like our interactions to be ad hoc. We don't want to be burdened down with a regular meeting.
Hmm.
The nice thing, and so 1996, Robert Putnam wrote a book that kind of scared the hell out of me. And this was way back in 1996. It's called Bowling Alone. He'd said that just 20 years prior, 2/3 of Americans had regularly attended a weekly meeting of some club, bowling league or Kiwanis or whatever.
Hmm.
And then by 1996, that number had fallen by more than half just in a very short period of time. I bet it's fallen in half again, right? The nice thing about being, joining a dart league or, a bowling league or being part of a service club is that you get to meet different types of people.
Hmm.
If the group is thoughtful
Right.
about recruitment
Right.
in that way. If you're not a joiner, if you're not really engaged in a broad base of the community, you're only talking to the same people
Hmm.
who live where you live, think like you
Yep.
think, look like you, and that is no way to grow.
Yeah.
And so, and that's why this is important from who do you believe and what do you believe and what news sources do you get?
Mm-hmm.
If you are hearing from 360 degrees of different type of people, that empathy will grow.
Yeah.
And it's not the others that are saying that. It's my buddy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's my friend. I understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
And so I wish more people were involved in this community in a real authentic way rather than just being a keyboard warrior on Twitter as their activism.
If you could draw up the new town hall, the new town square, where social collisions can happen and people can dialogue and things of that nature, what are some things that you think would be key elements that you would want to see if somebody's listening to this, is getting inspired to say, I want to create these type of spaces where these type of things can happen? What type of things do you think are paramount to make that work?
I think for me, job number one is make sure it's a legitimate cross-section of the community. And that's one of the things I love about public schools. Now, I don't mean anything bad about private schools. They're incredible private schools, and they create great leaders, and a lot of them are very diligent about serving socioeconomically challenged people.
Mm-hmm.
But in most places, when you go to a public school, you're seeing everybody. And just for me, in Fort Pierre and Pierre, the places I grew up, that means when I'm back in those communities, I know the plumber's daughter, I know the gal that's, working the coffee shop. I know people who are making, $12 an hour, and I know people who are making $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
But those are people who are my friends because of public school.
Right.
And so I think whatever interaction, I think one of the key ingredients should be, does it engage a real cross-section of the community?
Yeah.
Because how many other places, when you're a 14-year-old, other than public school, where are you interacting with people? And outside of public school, it's more often to be interacting with people who are a lot like yourself.
For sure. A couple things I want to get you on before we get you out. Well, one is youth. Because we are on the precipice of the greatest changeover of power, wealth, and responsibility the world has ever seen. A lot of big machines are going to be handed off to some people who haven't had intentional leadership development. Apprenticeship, especially in the last 30 years, hasn't been as significant as, the focus on trade starts to diminish or at least change in the landscape. There's a lot less of that connective tissue. There's a lot of brain knowledge that's not being onboarded and things of that nature. What's your thought process on youth? How can we help develop these folks? How can we invest in them? And I have a lot of urgency around this because I don't think people appreciate how quickly this is happening as boomers are leaving the workforce. And these young folks are stepping up, and 70% of leaders of organizations don't believe they currently have the leadership qualities in the organization to take it forward into the future, which is scary. Talk to me about youth, where your passions lie that way, and where some of the opportunities are in terms of enhancing our youth and getting them prepared to take the wheel.
And I think there are a lot of barriers to us doing this right. Part of it is the transformation on how long people expect themselves to be in an organization. Mm-hmm. And I think the old guys like me, we've got the memo. Young people are going to churn. And so there are a lot of employers who I think have pulled back a little bit from really investing at an emotional level about their new hires because, this girl's just going to be gone in 18 months anyway. Yeah. This guy's just going to be gone in 2 years. And so that's not, the good people still know that they owe society this leadership development.
Right.
But it's a lot harder for the organization to say any seeds I plant will never, ever be harvested by this company. That's hard to do. And that also makes it harder to build connective tissue. Because I actually think you don't get super real with coworkers the first 6 or 12 or sometimes 18 months. I mean, some of those meaningful professional relationships of my life did not even get real until a couple years in.
Yeah.
And so I do think, the old guys and gals have to probably they need to be deliberate about it. They need to write down. I mean, they can't just say, I need to do a better job. I think they need a plan. And even if it's a small organization, and even if the plan is only once a month, I'm going to take a different relative newcomer to the organization for lunch. And we're just going to talk, right? It's not a great plan, but it's a plan.
Right.
And then I think we've done a better job of this, but I think we also need to coach our young people into saying, like the old guy and gal are busy, so don't be too bashful to invite them to lunch too.
Yeah.
And again, that's hard to do because it sort of seems weird. It seems like you're being an ass kisser.
Yeah, it does.
But our organizations have to be willing to send a message. No, that's not ass kissing. That's you caring about this organization.
Yes. Well, and I think that's the thing too. That in most places, the person who's the most ambitious, the most engaged, that's the person that gets ostracized, where the,
Yeah.
the negative person is going to be collecting the check for 10, 20 years. You know what I mean? So that's a big one for me. A couple more things before we get out of here. I know you got a lot going on. We're in the middle of Black History Month. This is always an interesting time for me. And usually what happens is probably about, the last day or two of January, I get calls from press and things of that nature. And they say, hey, we want to do our stories for Black history and that type of thing. And we do that. And this just came up, there was some activity in Pierre about CRT and that type of thing. And I don't want to talk about that necessarily because I don't know enough about it to really represent it. But my question is going back to the education thing. Do you think there's still a value in a Black History Month? Do you think that we do an adequate job of educating folks on these type of things? And the reason why I want to talk about this, because one of the biggest things is not even just so much this subject matter, but context. We talk about it all the time. There's this side, there's that side, there's extremes that's been talked about ad nauseum. We know the cure is nuance. It's having pause and understanding it. It is near impossible to have nuance without context. And I just see
That's
so
right.
little passion for the context of things. And so because we're in Black History Month, we'll do it through that vehicle. But is there a point to it? Is there a value?
There is a point to it. There is value. It's not the perfect. I mean, the perfect would be for us, without malice or agenda, to have all of these different stories interwoven into every day when we're teaching and learning. I mean, that would be the perfect. Now, the question would be, will we be thoughtful enough to have those conversations if we're not prompted to do it with some formal official way? And we probably won't. Okay.
Right.
And so, I mean, I probably do a better job at talking to, my boys about Dakota culture when it is Native American Day in South Dakota.
Right.
Again, it should be every Tuesday and every Wednesday and every Thursday. At some point that should come up. I mean, it's
Right.
like 15% of South Dakota. It's not a small amount, right?
Right.
And so I think we still need these things. I am a little concerned that I don't want to say we're moving backwards because I know we're not.
Mhm.
But just today I was reflecting on the fact that, for 10 years in the 1980s, the mayor of Mitchell was Black, Bud Williams. People didn't even really think it was all that big a deal, right? The guy who had my job for 10 years in the 1960s representing South Dakota in the U.S. House, Ben Rifle, was full-blooded Lakota. And people it just didn't seem like people got hung up on it. We had 2 United States senators who were Arab Americans from South Dakota with names that are pretty easy to identify as Arab or Muslim. Abaresk and Abner, the AB, kind of the quintessential Middle Eastern AB. And it's in some respects harder now to imagine South Dakota electing statewide, Arab Americans. So again, I don't think we're moving backwards, but I do think that
but something's happening. You know what I mean? Like
something's happening. And I get it. We want to tell these stories. I just want to make sure that we don't focus so much on what someone is that we forget who they are.
For sure.
And so maybe as we mature through something like Black History Month, we'll do a better job of not viewing it as something that you pull out of American history and plop down to examine in the same way that we shouldn't plop out somebody's demographic box checks and evaluate them through that lens.
Right.
It's a part of who they are. This is a beautiful part, but it's better if we view it as part of a broader context.
Well, I mean, if there's a beauty to history, is that it happened. We don't have to argue that part.
Right. Right.
It just doesn't offer context to what we're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or even what we do today.
And I think it's this way with hiring too. I mean, after the George Floyd incident, one of the things I posted was, listen, we got to have more people of color who are cops. And I got attacked a lot, by South Dakota, who said, why would we hire somebody who's, not meritorious? And I said, I'm not talking about hiring anybody who's not up for the job.
For sure.
What I'm saying is that your funnel should be big enough, that you should be deliberate enough in grabbing a large candidate pool so that what comes out the bottom, not every time, but that as it comes out, that best, most meritorious pick these are going to be people who collectively represent our communities. This is not about quotas. This is about doing a good enough job on the front end.
For sure.
So you're not just talking to one guy or gal. you're talking to 10 or 12 or 14 and building that candidate base so that eventually what comes out of the funnel you can feel proud of.
Well, and the lack of representation in police or any other leadership position, particularly in South Dakota, because as far as it pertains to Black American at any level, nonprofit, C-suite, state government, local government, whatever, cabinet, you name it, there's no representation there. But the lack of representation is a matter of circumstance. There's reasons why that was the case. Why would anyone think that it would change without a change in circumstance?
Right.
Without an approach. And it's so interesting that when people have a frustration with the intention, if people are being put in a situation or harmed, whether as a result of intention or a lack of intention, we know to change that dynamic, it requires intention. But when the intention to change the situation becomes nefarious, you guarantee that it can't change.
Yeah.
And that it'll stay that way for forever. So now that people grow frustrated by the idea of us saying these people have a specific problem, they might need a specific solution.
Yeah.
If you take that out of it, it makes it pretty difficult. And especially when you look at the history of things, it's like, you can't take sugar out of cookies. Right? Some of this is the way it is, and without some intention, it may not change. Okay, before we get you out of here, because I know you got some stuff going on, I'm going to have you pick a card, any card, and I'm going to have you answer this question.
How nervous should I be?
I don't know. There's a couple dicey ones.
I got some landmines in there.
Hey, we got to get the clicks.
Yeah, right.
We got to get the clicks. All right, these are our cute conversation cards, and these are ones that we have, and they're cool conversation starters. So you go ahead and pick whatever one you want.
Pick. I read it, or do I hand it to you?
You read it.
Okay. When was a time your life changed for the better due to an intentional decision?
I feel like that's easy, but
for us, it was moving back to South Dakota. My wife and I were living down in the Kansas City area, and we loved Kansas City. And the money probably would have been better there, and the amenities would have been better. But we felt a sense of community here that even though we'd been gone for a few years, we wanted to feel again. And at the time, I don't want to say it was hard, but we spent a lot of time talking and thinking about it. And it just right now feels great because I feel like, listen, I don't know if Mitchell's the best city or Sioux Falls is the best city. I don't know if South Dakota's the best state, but this is our community.
Right.
And to feel like we belong and are helping others to feel like they belong, that feels good.
Yeah. Awesome. I thank you so much. And one of the things that I appreciate about you, I've told you this before, is that, when I hear you speak, it feels less about allegiance and more about intellect. And that's one of the things that I would like to see from more of our representatives. It's like you said, we're not in a gang. You know what I mean? And if we are going to be in a gang, it should be Americans.
Amen to that.
If that's going to be the case. So I appreciate you spending this time with us. It's a great example of leadership. How can people contact you, or what are some ways that you prefer people to reach out to you to learn a little bit more about what's going on and how they can stay up on?
Every week we send out a newsletter that's kind of hitting a topic in DC, and I think people really like that. It's thoughtful. It's not the standard, red meat attack messages.
Right.
And so people just go to our website, or they can follow us on social media. I'm an old man, so I'm not on TikTok, but it's at Rep Dusty Johnson on the other platforms, and it really is a conversation. Sometimes I respond. Staff gets super nervous when I do, but if it's not a discussion, why are we out there?
Right. It has to be. Well, you got a pretty young staff. You guys get him on TikTok. You guys got to get him on TikTok. There's no way around it. Well, thank you so very much. We appreciate you. And as for everyone else, you can always follow us on our socials at Think3D Solutions. And, of course, you can check us out at letsthink3d.com. Make sure you like and subscribe so you can always get access to amazing content like this. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Vaney.